Hey, TGIF, everybody. Good Friday morning. It's about 8:45. And I thought I'd ask you this question. In fact, the title's down there. The question's in the title right there. It basically says, was this the best time for the Mecha Sally World Tour 2 Death Egg Mark II arc? Whatever you want to consider. Basically, was it the best time for Ian Flynn to go with this story arc that's been going on for almost a year and a half now? Going on a year and a half. But here's the honest question. Do you think it was the best time frame? You know, some might sit there and they'll say, it was the best time. And that it was an interesting take on a lot of things. Well, I'll tell you this. Even though I haven't read the issues, and I know a lot of people get on me about that, Digimon 11, Emil Kennedy, aka the Ezekiel 300, and some others, the thing is, again, with myself, just mention this real quickly, I'm just going to wait till this whole thing comes, to an end, it comes to somewhat of a conclusion before, I should say, I make any kind of judgment. But to answer the question right here, in my personal opinion, I know some people might say, well, we didn't know this was going to happen. This case thing didn't start really picking up until about 11 and all that, so they didn't know. I totally get that. I totally understand that, but even with that exception, do you think this was the best time to do this? When you take a look at, what's been involved lately, the editings and stuff like that, especially what I mentioned in that, I think that 2-part video, where, again, I'll provide a link to where you can find that information. But do you think it was the best decision for Ian Flynn and Archie and all of them to go with this story arc when they did? I mean, I know they had it planned and all that, but, a lot of people, they look at this arc, they look at certain things that have happened throughout the story arc, and they pretty much feel that a lot of what we've been seeing, especially like with endangered species and a few other things could have been put to the side until the story arc was over. Maybe even Worlds Collide as well. But again, the question, like it says there, was this the best time? And to me, this arc, depending on whether you've read it or not, or, like me, you have the issues but you haven't opened them, or you've just stopped reading until maybe this whole thing comes to a conclusion. Even though, with those exceptions, you probably have noticed and heard that a lot of people have had mixed reactions about it. So, again though, my question is, do you think this was the best opportunity to do this story arc in? The best time frame? My honest opinion is, despite despite how it's going to come out in the end, I will say this, I don't think, now, before I say this, I'm not saying that this is totally against the whole idea of roboticizing Sally and mechanizing and weaponizing her and all that. It's nothing against that. But I just think that, he could have still gone in that direction, but he could have waited until certain things were settled. Like, this whole Ken Pender's settlement, lawsuit, whatever you want to call it, if I'm Ian Flynn, this is just my own personal opinion, if I'd known this was going to happen, I would have said to myself, you know what, I want to do this arc, I want to do this almost year-long or year and a half or 2-year-long story arc, but I don't want no interference, so maybe I should just wait on it. You know what I'm saying? In other words, he could have easily waited at least until maybe try to go, maybe at least going into something like 275 at the most. You know what I mean? Going into to something like 275 at the most, maybe even 300. But still, if I was Ian Flynn, I would have waited. I would have just backed off and said, okay, I got to come up with something. I have all these other stories that I've got planned to take place, as part of the arc, as a subplot in the arc, as part of the universe. Maybe I could try to incorporate them beforehand, we work them, and then help it lead into the story. And honestly, I know some people might say, well, that doesn't make sense. Well, let me explain. And in a way, it does make sense, because basically you'd still be going into the same story arc, but you'd be getting all this other stuff out of the way so that you wouldn't have no interference. Like endangered species might even have had the opportunity to be what it originally was supposed to be. I'm just saying, but again, that's just my opinion, but when you take a look at all the interference that's happened, a lot of the, stoppages, if you know what I mean, like, okay, or interruptions, the interrupting stoppages, like the Olympics, like that 242 being an Olympic tie-in issue, and it's like, why do we even have to do that? It makes no sense. Yes, Sega had something to do with it, but still, it makes no sense. Could have used that, but still. And then you take a look at Universe. One issue was dedicated, yeah, it was a one-off thing, but it was dedicated to technically being an adaptation of Sonic All-Stars Transformed. Sonic and Sega All-Stars Transformed. It's stuff like that. I mean, if I'm Ian Flynn, with all due respect to the guy, because he's potentially going to go on and be one of the most infamous, or one of the most well-known writers in the history of the comic. With all due respect, I would have held off on the story arc, knowing that I would probably have these kind of interruptions, and focused on what was going to be part of it in the main comic and the Universe comic, as well as put my focus on what was going to be the crossover, and then go right into the story arc. It would have made more sense. Because then you'd be able to do it without any interruptions, go straight forward, and it might be done sooner than some people would give it credit. Would give Ian Flynn or anybody else credit for. I mean, heck, you got people at these DeviantArt site, at some of these clubs, if you will, DeviantArt, that recently have put up a little contest, a little idea to basically rewrite certain parts of the story arc to make it better or make it shorter or whatever. But again, my question to a lot of you is, do you think this was the best time frame, this past year and a half? I mean, from October 11 to now, do you think this was the best time frame? I mean, again, you have all these other things that interrupted it. You have endangered species. You have all this, and on top of that, behind the scenes, you have this lawsuit between a former writer and the comic company that's distributing the comic. So, what do? Again, my honest opinion, if I was in Ian Flynn's shoes, and I'm not sure if anybody would agree, I would have held off on this, knowing that this was going to be my baby, this was going to be my masterpiece, this is going to be the one I wanted people to remember me by, so that if someday I decide, hey, I want to go work someplace else, at least I'll have something to say, yeah, or at least I'll have something to say, hang my hat on or hang my coat on and say, yeah, I did this over at Archie Comics. I would have held off on it, knowing it was going to be my baby, knowing it was going to be my masterpiece, so that I would be able to do it without any interruption. But the question, again, and it says it down there in some ways, was this the best time frame for this story arc? Was it the best time frame? Was it the best decision to go with it at this time, knowing that behind the scenes you had this lawsuit looming that could possibly affect the comic, even though let's say I could come out like Ian did and said, oh, nothing's going to be infected, but later on it ends up being that way. I end up being proven wrong. The thing is, do you think it was the best time? Do you think perhaps, you know, if I was Ian Flynn, or if you were Ian Flynn, you would have tried to get more information like, okay, are you sure now that this is going to interrupt the comic? Because if it does, maybe I should wait. Because I would have waited until this whole settlement ended. Or just, you know, I just basically would have waited on it until all this stuff that's happened had taken place and was done with. I would have waited, probably held off on it, probably done, like I said, endangered species. And when you think about it, you could have kicked off the post-Genesis deal. You could have still done Genesis, altered it a little bit, if you will, if you wanted to. Altered it a little bit if you wanted to. You could have kicked off Genesis. You could have kicked off your post-Genesis deal with endangered species. You kind of get the idea. You kind of get the idea, right? But my honest opinion, and again, with all due respect to Ian Flynn, Paul Kaminsky, and all those that work on this comic, because I know they are doing the best they can, believe it or not, I think this story arc could have waited until at least all this other stuff was over with. Until this whole lawsuit thing took place, until, you know, I would have waited, I would have held off, I would have basically focused on doing all this other stuff like endangered species. I would have focused on doing the Worlds Collide deal. I would have focused on all these one-shot deals, and you know, in both comics. And in a sense, that would open the door, if you will. In a sense, that would open the door to maybe use, and they could look at this as a financial idea because this would have helped them out. It would have opened the door to use both the main and the universe comic to kind of help make the story not just bigger, but to speed it up even quicker. You know, because I mean, basically take a page, if you will, out of what they're doing with Worlds Collide, and go like that. Go like, okay, you want to see the next part? Go read Universe. You want to see the next part? Go back to the main comic. And in the end, it would have helped, to me, it would have benefited this arc and the fan base and everybody else more so. But again, that's just me. So, but I do pose the question to you: do you think this was the best time frame? This was the best time frame to do this in? Let me know what you guys think. Comment down below, but let me know what you guys think. Video responses are greatly appreciated, and I'll talk to you later.